Hello, I'm Emily and welcome to Craft Camp. Today we are going to be making these paper shell cards. These are really fun custom gifts and they fit perfectly in an envelope. All right, let's get started. For our tools and materials today, we've got a few different types of coloring tools. I have a pack of colored pencils, some watercolor brushes, and some alcohol markers. You can use whatever you have on hand, play around with colors and textures. I also have two pairs of scissors, a larger pair and a smaller pair for the detail scallops. I've printed out my template onto two different types of paper. I've got watercolor paper and Prisma paper. This one's better for a wet medium and this is better for a marker. All right, let's get started. First, we're going to go ahead and cut out the card. I went and grabbed a ruler and I'm going to use this to create the fold along the bottom line of our shell. So I'll just hold it right along that line and I'll just fold it upwards to start. Try to get a nice crease. And then I'm going to fold it the other way. And we're just trying to get it right along that line of the shell. And once we've got this nice and creased, I'm going to go straight into cutting this out. And by doing this, we're creating the second layer of the card and it's going to be perfectly in line with the top layer. This paper is pretty thick, so I'm using my nice chunky scissors, but I'm going to just leave these little scallops out and go back in and cut that out with my detail scissors. And you can see this now opens up like this. And don't throw this away. We want to hold on to this so we can test our mediums as we move on. One of my mom's favorite tips is when you're cutting out complex shapes, always turn the paper and not the scissors. So you can see that I'm just slowly rotating the paper and closing my scissor blades together. All right, now we've got this first one cut out and you can see since I cut it double layered, it's perfectly aligned. Even if it's not perfect, it doesn't really matter. There's no perfect shells out in nature. All right, let's do the same with the other one. Now remember what I said, make sure you don't throw this extra paper away because we're going to use this just to test out our mediums as we work and put it on our card. We don't want to put any colors on that we don't like. When you print on watercolor paper, you might notice that the ink will disappear when you put water on it. If this happens to you, I want you to go ahead and test it over here on your scrap paper, just with your watercolor brush and a bit of water, and see if the ink disappears when you get it wet. If it doesn't disappear, you can go ahead and move right on to the next step. But if it does, it's very easy to remedy. I just want you to go in with a colored pencil or a pen. Again, test it on the scrap paper, see if it is water soluble. And if it stays put, go ahead and just outline the lines on the template. Now we're going to go ahead and start coloring. I'm going to be using watercolor for these first sets. And I'm going to stick with kind of a pastel-y, beachy color scheme. Now, something that I want you to keep in mind when you're applying color to these shells is that shells usually have a little bit of a round shape to them. So they're going to be the lightest, there's going to be the most highlight here on the highest point, right in the middle. And also there'll be highlights along the curves in the center and shadows where there's these lines. So we can keep that in mind when we're applying color. Again, have fun with it. Feel free to just play around and mush things. I think it's really fun to do with watercolor. I'm going to be using my largest brush to start and I'm just getting it pretty wet, and we'll just go in with a wash of just straight water. And after I do this, I'm going to pick my first color. I think I want to do like some pinks and teals. So I'll start off with this light pink. And again, you can make sure to test your colors over here, make sure you like it before you put it on. And I'm just going to go straight down that highlight line. And I want this to be really nice and blurry and soft. So I'm just going to dab a little bit of water all along in here. Now we're just going to go in with some blue. And I want these to intermingle a bit. So I'm going to dab them kind of close together, let the water play. Watercolor is my all-time favorite medium just because I love the natural way the paint interacts with each other. The water just lets lots of cool little things happen. Yeah, like look at that, cool little things. I'm just going to follow these arches a little bit, get some of that pink kind of mingling with that blue a little more. And I'll just let it pool down there, get a little extra darkness. I think it looks nice. After this, I'm going to go ahead and just let this dry. And we'll let this fully dry before we do any more. We can continue layering on top of it and making it darker, but let's just set this aside and let it dry. We'll do this one for now. So I'm using this peachy tone over here. It's really light, and I just want that shell look. This time I'm not getting the shell wet ahead of time. I'm going in straight on dry paper, and you can see the difference with just how the paint interacts with the paper. So this is a really fun way just to experiment with watercolor, see what you like. Again, the high points are going to be kind of in the center of these little sections, so I'm going to keep my color concentrated to those shadows and maybe even leave a little gap of white where the highlights would be. The cool thing about this particular watercolor palette is it's very reactivatable. What it means is that the watercolor will pick back up if you go back in with more water, or if you kind of scrub at it, the color will just lift right up and it comes off and blends together. You can see that just softened right up. This would be a great time for me to switch to my smaller paintbrush. I always insist on using the large one until the last minute. You can see with this one, I left quite a bit of white space, and if you wanted, you could stop here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with a little bit of a contrasting color and just kind of add some in there just for fun. Watercolor is really fun for mixing different tones. Now, we do want to keep in mind if I go straight into the wet paint with the contrasting color, they're going to melt into maybe a gray or a brown, and we don't want that. So I'm going to let this fully dry, and then I'll go in maybe with some green or blue and go right in that white area to add kind of an iridescent glimmer. So this shell is not quite dry. I've got a little puddle of water down here, but I'm going to go ahead and go in with a little bit of a darker blue just to add some more depth to the corners. And again, I'm just going in with my darker blue and I'm going right along these lines and just adding that extra bit of depth. But I am lifting my paintbrush up right at the end there so that it doesn't get too much color and we can kind of have a smooth blend into that highlight pink. And we're almost done. I'm going to leave this pretty light because I want these to be kind of on that pastel-y color spectrum, not too vibrant, as we want to remind people of the calm ocean. And finally, I just made a little bit of this kind of teal color here, mixing the green and this light blue, and I'm just gonna add one more little color area just for fun. I'm gonna go right in between the blue and the pink. And if I feel like my lines are too harsh, I'll just blend it out with some water. All right, we got a little crazy with this one, but I think it's looking pretty fun. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this dry and we will play with our orange shell again. So for this one, I'm thinking that I kind of wanted to use like a really limey green, just because I think that would look fun in contrast with the orange. So I just mixed up that same green and a little bit of this yellow over here on the side of the palette. And there's quite a bit of water in there because I don't want too much color. Dabbed it off, and I'm just gonna go right in these gaps. And this almost looks like algae kind of clinging to the side of the shell, which I like. You can even add little dots or stipples if you want to make that look even more like something's growing on it. Just a fun reminder, you can do all sorts of textures with watercolor, not just the water blending together. You can also do dots and lines, really just play with it. I'm even going to add a little more of that green to this mix and just go right in at the end where there's that extra white gap. Trying not to go over the orange too much just because I don't want to make muddy colors. But there we go, little green in there. I think it looks nice. Another thing that you can keep in mind while you're painting your shells is that you're always welcome and encouraged to look up references, look at pictures of shells and see their patterns. You can see sometimes there's like little lines or zigzags kind of arching across shells. There's all sorts of different really cool variations that you can bring into this project. And I always encourage references when doing art. It really helps. I went ahead and added just a little bit of a pattern on this shell. As you can see, I based it off of a real shell, and this is why I love references. For the next shell, I'm going to go ahead and use the alcohol markers that I have, and I've picked out some pastel colors. I'm going to be doing a gradient from a kind of an orangey tone to a blue. I love playing with alcohol markers specifically because they have a lot of really fun blending properties to them. You can get a lot of different really cool textures and blends. And so the way that I'm using this is I'm holding the brush pen at an angle and I'm just dropping it down where I want it the darkest and slowly lifting up so that I get a nice gradient. And from there, we'll blend down into our next color. You can do the same exact technique with most mediums. You can do this with a paintbrush or regular water-based markers. Whatever you have on hand, just experiment. I'm keeping the darkest blue centered right in the middle of these little scallops. All right, now I'm going to switch to slightly darker blue and I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I'm just going to stop short. So we've only got that darker blue right on the tips and I'm leaving a little bit of a gap between. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the color that I'll be doing at the bottom of the gradient. So I'm going to go ahead in with this really pale pink color and I'm going to do the same thing, but we're going to be going from the bottom this time and blending right up into that blue, all the way up. Not to the tip, but right about maybe 3/4 of the way. And this is a very light color, so you might not be able to see it on camera, but it's going to give us a really nice base for the rest of the gradient. Next, I'm going in with a peachier tone, and I'm just going to do the same thing right at the bottom, blending it up. And this time I'm bringing that pink kind of right along the line up a little higher so that it just comes into that gap that we left. And don't get discouraged if it blobs or if there's anything that you don't love, if it's not perfect. Just keep throwing more colors on there, play around. This is all just practice. Nice. I'm just going in with a little yellow and I'm going to fill in those little gaps that I left, going all the way down into the pink, but not all the way to the end. We'll just kind of stop right here in the middle. And there we have a really pretty gradient. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add some more texture and details in with my colored pencil. And I think using two mediums at once can add a really cool technique, a really cool look. So let's go in with our colored pencil. I'll use a pink one to start and just kind of add some strokes, like the shell texture. And this is where you can add your pattern if you want to. And I'm just going to switch colors as I go up the shell, so the gradient is continuing. I'm going to be really light-handed with this blue because it's a little on the dark side, so I'm just really gently sweeping it down. Something to keep in mind when you're doing these long strokes like I've been doing for this piece is keep your wrist movement in mind. So if I'm going up, I'm keeping my wrist movement in mind. I'm using the same repetitive wrist motion as I go, turning my shell. I'm not moving my arm all around. I'm really using my wrist to my advantage. And that's what helps get those beautiful, even sweeping marks. And there we have our gradient shell. I think this one looks really nice close up. And if we wanted to, we could even go into our watercolor shells and add some more texture with colored pencils. I hope you enjoyed making these as much as I did and maybe learned a little bit about using different mediums. The different papers that I used today are in our new art paper pack available in our shop, feltpaperscissors.com. We'll see you next time. Shalom! Shalom!